It's very important to the process of understanding Google Cloud and passing the certification exam that you go through the question and attempt answering it yourself first. So pause the video, work through the question. We'll catch up in just a little while and I'll show you how I do it. In this scenario, your company is migrating a 30-node Apache Hadoop cluster to the cloud. They want to reuse Hadoop jobs they have already created and minimize the management of the cluster as much as possible. They also want to be able to persist data beyond the life of the cluster. What should you do? So in this scenario, your company already has an on-prem setup for Apache Hadoop with a reasonably large installation of 30 nodes. They already have Hadoop jobs created that they are running regularly. Now, in moving to Google Cloud, they want to reuse those Hadoop jobs. At the same time, they also want to minimize the management of the cluster. So they want to bring down the administrative overhead of managing the cluster itself, while not making a lot of code changes, and therefore the reason to use a Hadoop jobs that already exist. Another requirement is that the data that we use and process as part of this Hadoop cluster should live beyond the life of the cluster. So in shifting to Google Cloud and minimizing the management around the cluster, we're probably going to pick a managed service. And this managed service is going to bring up a cluster and bring it down. When it does that, the data corresponding to that cluster should not be lost. What is the right approach now? There's one thing we need to know about migrating on-prem Hadoop or Spark to Google Cloud. When you need to do this, and if it's a lift and shift operation, which is essentially whatever you had on-prem, you want to replicate that on the cloud, then the right option within Google Cloud is Cloud Dataproc. This allows you to reuse the jobs that are already running on Google Cloud directly. If you did have an option to rewrite the data processing pipelines, then you should probably consider Dataflow. With that understanding, let's go look at each of the options. Option A suggests create a Google Cloud Dataflow job to process the data. As we discussed, using Cloud Dataflow will require us to rewrite the data processing jobs. It is not the same technology as Apache Hadoop or Spark. But the requirement states that we want to reuse the Hadoop jobs and we don't want to have additional code. Therefore, we are having to eliminate option A. Option B suggests that we create a Google Cloud Dataproc cluster that uses persistent disk for HDFS. So we already discussed how Dataproc is the right solution when you want to migrate Apache Hadoop to Google Cloud without having to change a lot of code. So that is a good start. However, using persistent disks is not a good idea when working with Cloud Dataproc. When you have VMs and then the disks that are attached to it logically, when the cluster is brought down, the VMs are brought down, and therefore we tend to lose the data on the persistent disks. It is also very normal to use preemptible VM instances that give you a huge discount. Now, these machines can quickly go in and out of existence. If that be the case, then the attached data is also lost. Even if there are ways to save this data onto other persistent disks or to retain the data from this persistent disk somewhere else, it will all require additional tasks. And that additional overhead is not going to help us because we want to minimize the management of the cluster. So given that, we will have to eliminate the option that uses a persistent disk along with Cloud Dataproc. Option C suggests that we create a Hadoop cluster on Google Compute Engine that uses persistent disks. Now, Google Compute Engine is a infrastructure as a service. It is able to give you raw VMs and you can use it for whatever you want. So if you are using Apache Hadoop cluster on-prem with your own machines, you could replicate the same thing within Google Cloud. However, we are not then minimizing the management of the cluster, which of course is a requirement. We are going to have to do the same things we did on-prem also on Google Cloud. So that definitely is not a good option. And of course, we already discussed the use of persistent disks, that these do not outlive the cluster. Therefore, we will eliminate option C. Option E suggests that we create a Hadoop cluster on Google Compute Engine that uses local SSD disks. As in option C, though this is possible, it does not minimize the administrative overhead of managing the cluster. So this is not a good option to start with. What about using a local SSD? A local SSD will be much faster than using a persistent disk like a spinning disk or an SSD. However, the data on it is ephemeral. When the VM shuts down or is restarted, we lose all data on the local SSD. So it does not even outlive a VM restart, leave alone the entire cluster. Therefore, it does not suit our requirement that the data persists beyond the life of the cluster. And for both these negative situations, we are having to eliminate option E. Option D now suggests we create a Cloud Dataproc cluster that uses Google Cloud Storage. Now, the first part is exactly what we want. In doing a lift and shift migration of Hadoop from on-prem to Google Cloud, Dataproc should be your first choice. Of course, provided that we do not have an option to rewrite the data processing jobs. How about using cloud storage? Cloud storage is a solution that is separate from Dataproc, which means that whatever you store on cloud storage will persist even beyond the life of the cluster. In fact, when the cluster comes up, it could read from, say, previous jobs. And when the cluster shuts down, it would have saved it back onto cloud storage. Given these two are independent solutions, it is also a good option to store data on cloud storage because it can also scale as much as you want. You can also access it from multiple places. You're not restricted to a particular zone or region. So for all those reasons, option D is the most suitable for our requirement, which is to use a Cloud Dataproc cluster and to use cloud storage as the storage point. Google Cloud Storage Connector is a library that allows you to do the connection between Hadoop and storage. All right, now it's time for you to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Go ahead, do that right now, because there's loads of great content coming up for learning Google Cloud and preparing for the certifications.